Good morning. My name is Mike McCauley. I'm the moderator for the next session entitled State of California Dairy, where we have a couple leaders within the California dairy industry to talk about not only overcoming disruptions, but some of the embracing some of the new opportunities that have come forward over the last year. And I think as I kind of reflect on what's happened here over the last year or so, and really since last spring of 2020. I think all I can say for all of us, we wish we were back in person. That's coming soon, but we're still doing these meetings virtually. I can tell you, I'd have a hard time coming up with a prettier place in the country for a dairy conference. I've always enjoyed coming to CCOA in Lake Tahoe, and just love the setting. So hopefully be able to see everybody there next year. But as we have our virtual format, I think everybody's gotten used to those over the last year or so. What we want to do today is like I said, share some perspectives, not only of the challenges and opportunities over last year, but then also looking forward. Before I get started, I want to just maybe provide a little background on myself. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working in the dairy industry for about 25 years. I started with Kraft Foods and worked there for about 16 years in dairy purchasing, most of the time in dairy purchasing. And then I left in 2012 to start my own consulting business where I work pretty much exclusively in the dairy industry, ranging from working with dairy processors and cooperatives, all the way through food companies, global food companies, trade associations, private equity firms, research firms. So I get to see pretty much the entire supply chain and value chain from the farm all the way through to consumer, not only here in the U.S., but globally. And I think that's what will be a good good perspective as we get into the discussion here this morning. We're both going to hear about opportunities within the U.S. market, but also opportunities and challenges in the global market. And again, I think just as a setup for our discussion, you think back a year ago or a little over a year ago, a huge amount of disruption when it came to moving milk around the country, particularly last April. A lot of milk being dumped. Again, the word unprecedented was used many times last year, and for good reason. But we had unprecedented supply chain challenges from all the milk being dumped, the rapid shutoff of food service, basically closing down of the economy. And I think back late April or so of 2020, we had cheese prices were at $1. Butter prices were down. It was really bleak outlook. Yet not even 3 months later, we had cheese at $3, an all-time record high. Huge recovery in milk prices. But with that came a lot of disparity between different class prices. And I know for the farmers dialing in, there was a lot of angst in terms of where your milk was going. There was huge spreads, and again, unprecedented spreads between class 3 and class 4, not only in California, but across the country. And that created a lot of challenges as well. So as we got through probably middle of last year into the fall, we were still dealing with a lot of disruption when it came to supply chains. And I would say, it seemed like we got into a COVID normal by the second half of the year. And by the end of the year, everybody was ready for 2020 to be over with. I think as we got into 2021, so pretty much everyone was said, okay, good, 2020 is over. We're going to get back to normal in 2021. But unfortunately, what we've seen in 2021 is just a different set of challenges as well as opportunities. I think it ranges anywhere from shortage of different products. We're definitely in an inflationary environment for those of you that are buying feed. It's had a huge increase in feed prices since the first of the year, and even more accelerated over the last few months, although things have eased back a bit here over the last month or so. We've got, again, continued volatility in some of the dairy prices, although with cheese prices settling back down around 150, which is the lowest point they've been at really since last May or so. Butter prices dropped a bit. So I've been telling people we've kind of got into the summer doldrums already in the dairy markets. That the markets have priced in a reopening of the economy and higher feed costs. Now we're just going to wait to see how the summer plays out here. So with that as a setup, I want to introduce today's panelist. And again, I think it's both have a great backgrounds, especially as we talk about not only the domestic market, but the international market. And our first panelist is Patty Smith. She is the CEO of Dairy America. Patty has been in the dairy and the food industry for 30 years or so. Has had experience. She was, prior to joining Dairy America, she was CEO at Valley Milk, and also had a number of experiences in Fonterra as well as Roquette America. And I'm sure Patty joined middle of last year. I'm sure she'll be able to tell us some of the challenges of shipping and logistic issues that have been in the international market so far this year, as well as some of the opportunities that the U.S. has opened up into some of the new export markets. Our other panelist is John Talbot. John's also probably a familiar face to a number of you. He's the CEO of the California Milk Advisory Board. Again, a lot of experience, more than 25 years in marketing and management experience. He was with the California, the Almond Board of California before. He also has experience in food companies, working with Pepsi, as well as E&J Gallo Winery. So welcome to both of you, and just kind of start out with a kind of open-ended question to talk about, maybe over the last 12 to 15 months in the kind of COVID era, what are some of the greatest challenges that you've seen? And then also, what are some of the opportunities that you've seen? And Patty, we can start with you if you'd like.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Mike, for that. And obviously very happy to be here today as part of CCOA. But yeah, I think if we look back, and I think it's important to dial back almost 18 months, right? We've got to go into where we started hearing about COVID and really thought it was just a Southeast Asia thing and maybe wouldn't impact the U.S. to the extent it did, or to the globe it did. And when you look at it, I'll particularly go back 12 months, in about, I'd say, in about 16 hours, I will have been at Dairy America for 1 full year, right? I walked in here as their new leader right in the middle of a pandemic. But no, I think when you look at it, the challenges are similar no matter what business you were in, and in particular on the dairy side. It was really around 2020, started relatively strong on the market side. And then all of a sudden, come February, the world changed. And the world changed. And I think one thing we learned is things really do and can change pretty much overnight. We saw demand change swiftly, as Phil talked about earlier, with less eating out because you couldn't. So that consumer side switched to the grocery chain. But then also we looked at Mexico came off the board, which is a big play for the dairy industry, obviously from an export market. And then you saw Mexico come back into the play. So really it's about that volatility, reacting to it, and be able to react to it quickly was the key component there for us. But also the other challenges were just on the labor side. When we look at it, it's our people. You really had to, and as a new leader to a new organization, I had to really put that in high gear of, I didn't know my team like I did at my other organizations. And that was a challenge because you had to really have that empathy and know what those people were going through. Was it because they couldn't see family? Was it because the kids were all of a sudden home and you had to homeschool? All those things were impacting our day-to-day lives. As Phil pointed out as well, all of our lives and our day-to-day challenges were impacted earlier. So when you look at that, really we did have those challenges. It was where to find that demand, and then once you found it, how to have the business execution to be able to maintain it and be able to move that business forward at the levels you need to be profitable, but also to do the best for the dairy industry, particularly the California dairy industry. So when you look at it, it was a year of, and then 18 months of things we never heard before, right? And I think the words have been out there, the buzzwords, quarantine, lockdowns, things that I'd never heard in my lifetime. And you did age me a little bit when you said 35 years in the industry, but it is true. But, I think that's the key thing, is focusing really on that whole farm to table. We had to go back to what are the impacts on the farm? How do we get that milk produced and manufactured into the ingredients we need around the globe? And that was the challenge, and keeping our people on top of it and motivated to run our businesses. But more importantly, what opportunity it brought. I'm a firm believer it brought dairy back to the forefront, in particular around nutrition and sustainability, and being able to provide a product that is actually what we need in all countries for ongoing nutrition, if it be at home, work, or in a restaurant. So it really gave us a good vision for the future, but a focus on how to do business better as we move forward.
Okay, thanks. And John, that's I think a good segue to you. And I mean, I know of someone who's had a friend last year who's in charge of marketing for Corona beer, And it's like there couldn't have been a worse job around it, in a marketing world than trying to do that. Dairy was fortunate. I mean, dairy performed very well, and I think maybe share some of your perspectives on what you've seen over the last year, both challenges and opportunities for dairy.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And I'll hit on a couple channel thoughts as well as talking about some of the consumer things that were going on. First on the channel side, and Gary and Phil both talked about the resiliency of the dairy industry, and I think we really have to step back for a moment and look at what actually happened over the last 15 months. It's remarkable that we came through all that relatively unscathed, because the real problem, and Phil talked about, food service and retail are about the same size from a volume standpoint, and when one of them gets shut down, it creates chaos. But the real problem is the grocery supply chain in general, including dairy, was all optimized around just-in-time inventory management. And again, one of the two key channels for our industry shuts down and everything gets forced through the other. With all of that demand now moving into the retail sector, it created all kinds of chaos in store. You had products that were out of stock, and consumers that were trying to stock up, and it was a real mess. So that was kind of one of the first key things we had to do, was try and help the industry reach that equilibrium again, where inventory was matching demand. But it took a while. But fortunately, if you look at the numbers, after a couple months, the restaurant side of the equation kind of leveled off about minus 10 to 15%. The retail channel leveled off about plus 10 to 15%. And in the end, we really didn't lose much volume. But there were certainly some insights along the way. On the restaurant side, you had to be in either takeout or delivery. You were not going to survive without that. And fortunately for us, the one segment of the restaurant industry that actually did well was pizza. So we benefited actually from that. And in California, we benefited even more so than in many other areas. On the consumer side, one of the key words from the pandemic, for us at least, was all about pivot. So all of our marketing programs had a pivot around what was going on with consumers. And in the consumer world, it was all around home. We were working at home. Our kids were going to school at home. We were cooking at home, eating at home, entertaining at home. So everything had to revolve around that. And the great thing for dairy was that along with that came a resurgence, a revisiting, reacquainting ourselves with things like breakfast, which is oh so important to the dairy industry. So we saw nice increases in milk, along with cereal. We saw increases in yogurt even. So again, that breakfast phenomenon was a great revisit for us. The other thing, on the channel side that you have to acknowledge was, and this was driven largely by the out of stocks, initially, and the reluctance to go into retail stores, but e-commerce just boomed. Jumped ahead as much as 5 years, in many people's estimates. Grocery sales went up 64%. Milk and cheese were up over 100%. So those were all really dynamic changes that we had to kind of adapt to on the fly.
Okay. Well, this is I'll come back to you as a follow-up. As what that was the background over the last 12 to 15 months or so, what trends do you think are going to continue? Are we going to go back to normal consumption patterns at food service? My thought is, you said cheese has done very well. I think cheese continues to do well going forward. I think butter probably struggles for a bit. But what online? That's a great question. I mean, is online going to is it going to fade back, or are we in a new era of a lot more online services, delivery or pickup, online ordering of groceries. Is what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll start again on the restaurant side. Restaurants are coming back with a vengeance right now. They've just been, there's this pent up, need to get back and keep people, coming back to restaurants, serving them inside, and that's all been very good. But I'll tell you, I think one of the key things that came out of the pandemic was this idea of working from home, and that's going to stay. Not entirely, not what it had been, but there are going to be a lot more people spending a lot more time at home, and that's a good thing for us from the standpoint of food preparation at home, breakfast at home. We're going to continue to push that kind of occasion-based marketing to try and get people to, again, keep integrating dairy into some of those different food occasions. But the other thing, again, consumers have, throughout the pandemic, have kind of rethought about health and wellness. The whole idea of immunity has been a very popular topic. And so what that's doing right now, that interest in health and wellness is creating more of an interest in functional foods, if you will. Dairy fits very nicely into that, but there's a big opportunity for us to do more on that front, to come out with products that address some of those functional, health-oriented needs of consumers. So there's a lot of positive things, I think, that we can try and connect with and take advantage of, as we look forward.
Yeah, thanks. And I should have mentioned this early on for any of you that have a question. Please type it into the text box on the side, and I'll introduce those into the conversation as we go forward. Patty, I think that was a good point you brought up here about the immunity and the role of dairy. And I think we've seen quite a bit of it out of China of interest in actually, communicating to the government, basically telling people eat more dairy. It's good for your immune system. What's your perspective on that? Have you seen a change in the milk powder markets or ingredient markets because of some of the shift?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's real key, and it's really around, I think, to the earlier point, it's health and wellness, right? So it focuses more just on nutrition, but immunity. And that's what we're really seeing in particular. Yes, China's driving that, but you're seeing it out of Southeast Asia in general. You're also seeing it domestically. But when you look at it, obviously Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, it's become quite a priority there. And it's really resetting that baseline. So what really was needed for nutritional powder now, that baseline is raising the bar. They want to make sure that they have that functional ingredient and it carries all the nutrition we need. So you're going to see a dynamic and a shift over the time in what those milk powders are that are going in. Are there more blends? Are there more nutritional components in those powders? Because that's what the consumer is demanding in Southeast Asia. And it's all driven around health and wellness and immunity in particular. But I think you're going to see the same thing in other places, even south of the border for LATAM. And I think you're already seeing a shift of it in the US as well. So it's here to stay. And I think the pandemic solidified it.
Yeah, I don't, this is probably a topic you wish you didn't have to talk about anymore, but all the logistic issues and the shipping issues from earlier this year. Talk about how the struggle through getting through that and where we're at now. Is it better solved, still challenges? What kind of get for people that aren't as close to this as you've been, probably share some of your trials and tribulations.
Yeah. So my team and we live and breathe it every single day. It's actually, if you read the reports, they'll say things have subsided a little bit or settled down. It's just a different component. It's a huge dynamic, and what started out to be port congestion on the West Coast, it was really a thought that it was driven by labor and the whole regulations in California around the pandemic, that was really the driving force. Then that was exacerbated around trucking availability, which we're going to hear about in the next session, in particular around just trucks in California. But then you had equipment availability. So were the chassis in the right places? Could you get them? Could you load a 20-foot? Could you get a 40-foot? And then, all of a sudden, then you had to get the drayage to the port. And then, then the whole vessel piece kicked in, and Ocean Company said, hey, I'm not going to call this port anymore. I got to get my vessels back to where it needs to be. So you had port of calls changed. And obviously at one point it was more cost advantageous and profitable for shipping lines to ship empty containers back to Southeast Asia versus container with U.S. goods. So it's been an array of everything. I think the key driving factors right now are still around trucking availability. If you get the vessel space, you still got to get it to the vessel. You've got to get it in that container. So those are two key things. There's a lot of product sitting in warehouses that's sold. It just can't get out of the country. And that's across the board. And I think the other piece of it is the labor piece of it. There's a shortage of drivers. There's a shortage of personnel at the ports. It's across the board. So it's just been exacerbated. Is it better? Well, I'll tell you, I say some days it's better than last week. I do believe it's moving in the right direction. Let me put it that way. If you look at just port of calls and congestion, if you look at just the Port of LA, they were averaging back in March, April, somewhere between 20 vessels that needed to be berthed. And, that average went down to 16. A couple weeks ago, it was at 11. We're back up to around 16. We've got to get I say it's kind of that pivot word, right? We've got to find a sustainable supply chain infrastructure, because we're going to continue to import more and export more. It's driven by a lot of factors, not just dairy. So we've got to find a way to pivot and kind of reset so we can get ourselves back on the playing field, especially before we move into the holiday season. It keeps me up at night as more things come into play. But it's about innovation. It's being innovative, of finding better ways to do things, being creative, and finding ways to get products to those ports and on those vessels, even if it means you use different protocols for that Southeast Asia market in particular.
All right, let's see. Blake had a question, I think is a good one as a follow-up to that. Given what we're seeing, kind of some of the current supply chain challenges, what impact is that going to have on exports from California? And I guess for those of you that aren't paying that close of attention to it, March was an all-time record high for dairy exports out of the U.S. April was an all-time record high for cheese exports. So even with all the bad stuff that's just been going on, is it that U.S. exports could be even better, or will be even better when those things get resolved?
Yeah, I think you'll actually see the statistics go up. So you got to remember the statistics that just came out was everything that actually left the country. And there's backlogs out there that didn't make those vessels. So I think you're going to see a huge number. It's a very good point though, Mike. I mean, when I look at it and my team here, I think they get frustrated at me at times, because I'll get, hey, we got to get more out, or why didn't we get this out in a particular month? We're exporting at record levels compared to what we did, and we're in a major supply chain crisis. So it speaks really a lot of words for where the industry is going. We need to get that infrastructure in place, but it also shows that we're able to do a lot under pressure and still get a lot out of this country. And that's not just on the dairy side. You can look at what else leaving the country, but also what we're bringing in and unloading is incredible, thanks to online shopping and people working from home, right?
Yep, exactly. John had a question here that wanted to get your thoughts on, what do innovation opportunities look like for California dairy, both in the domestic market and international market? I know this is something that you guys spend a lot of time on and very passionate about.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It may seem a little counterintuitive, but being in a crisis like this pandemic is the absolute best and most important time to be thinking about innovation. It's when consumers are shifting, in terms of their perspective on things, what's important to them. And now to be able to go out and bring new products to consumers that reflect their current, thoughts and perspectives and needs is really vital. And it's something that as an industry, we need to all think about more and create more of that culture of innovation and find ways to continue to feed the flywheel and get the ideas going and generate, excitement again around, the dairy category. The last couple of years, we've done this accelerator program to try and get out new ideas into the California dairy industry. And it's amazing what that does just to provide energy to the system. When there are new ideas. And we're going to do a whole session tomorrow on innovation. So I'm not going to go too much into specifics here, but I did mention in my last comment, the idea of functional foods. I think that's something that is a ripe area for innovation. There are a whole variety of areas, whether it be immunity or even ways to calm yourself down. Maybe the opposite of what many people think of in terms of energize yourself. And then, also the whole gut biome and that idea of improving your digestional health. There are a lot of ways that we can use dairy to help provide benefits to consumers through our products. And there's a lot of very exciting new areas that are just around the corner.
Great. Here's a follow-up question from an audience member. Said consumers have had a great time to think about what concerns them. How have their views have they changed their views on the food supply over the last year, 15 months or so? Have their views changed on the food supply?
Is this consumers' views?
Yeah, consumers. Yep.
Not sure how to answer that. I think, again, the pandemic has created a lot of questions and doubt in people's minds in many ways. So there's always going to be, I think, will be a healthier skepticism around product quality, safety. So those things, again, they've always been important, but even more so now when people have been spooked by, the pandemic, they question a lot of things. So food supply is one where they certainly are going to be paying very close attention to, in terms of the quality and the sourcing for the products that they feed their families.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Mike, I think to John's point, it is really around the wholesomeness and the quality. And also just what I'll call the true expectations that consumers are going to put out there. If we look at it even from the export side, countries that put in place that they were going to test product for COVID or test it for specific things before it was allowed off their ports, knowing can you do it or can you not do it, right? So there's just a lot of that skepticism, I think, that will continue, but be very, very focused on the quality attributes of product in general, but also the sustainability of supply, right? I think as a American consumer, when we walked in the grocery store and couldn't get a gallon of milk, it was shocking for most people, right? Yeah. It wasn't the toilet paper, it wasn't the Lysol, the disinfectant sprays and stuff. Those I think people understood. But the day you walked in and couldn't buy a pat of butter or even basic cheese or a gallon of milk, I think it really eye-opened the consumer across the U.S. and across the globe.
Yeah, that's a great point. Blake Anderson asked a question about with the current heat wave on the West Coast, particularly up in the Pacific Northwest. Patty, are you seeing much of an impact yet on production? And is it going to impact milk supply? And if it does, is it going to impact it differently than what it has in the past?
Yeah, I think the differently in the past is kind of that $1 million question, right? We never know until it's kind of through the phase. But yes, it's starting to impact it. You're starting to see milk across the United States actually decrease. But it was a long flush with a really long tail this year. So you saw a lot of milk production. Because even though we were getting, if I just use California as an example, we can say throw Pacific Northwest in there as well. But if we look at California, we were getting very hot during the day the last couple of months, but we were still cooling down at night. You were still in those mid 50s. It was beautiful weather. If you think, I work on the principle, if I can go out for a run at night, then the cows are pretty happy, right? But now we're in this heat wave focus right now. I think in the Central Valley here in California where I live, we've got 21 days projected of over 100 degrees. And when I say over 100, it's 104 plus and not down to maybe 72, 71 at night. So you're now in a new phase that does put more pressure on the calves and the cows. But with that said, there's a lot of cow-calf comfort out there. I don't want to take away from the California and Pacific Northwest dairy farmers have done a great job of really putting in play a lot of calf-cow comfort. and things on the farm that have really helped. But you're going to see it subside a little bit. How much, we don't know. What does that change to production? It will make sure that we're putting the product in the right categories, right? As we see demand shift from cheese and butter and powder, we'll see where things go. But they all have a play. And as Phil mentioned, you're seeing a little bit of spot opportunity on some. You're seeing the balance on butter maybe change a little bit, but on powder, it's still very healthy, both for the domestic as well as an export play.
And probably doesn't make anybody in California feel good, but I was based in Indiana, and I was in Wisconsin over the weekend, and it did get over 65 degrees and cloudy and rain. So, something a little warmer was welcome at that time.
Yeah, I think we're due to get 107 today. You gotta love the heat.
Yep. It's a dry heat. John, here's a question that came in. How do you think the pandemic has changed the school world? Probably specifically around dairy and milk.
Well, I know a lot of parents who are really excited about their kids going back to school. So, I think over time, that's all going to kind of fall back into place. This concern because of the pandemic was certainly very real. Hopefully we're coming around the bend on that, and both parents and kids are going to feel comfortable going back to school, and that opens up for us as an industry certainly another channel of opportunity from a selling standpoint, which is very important to us. And we just have to hope that the health and well-being of the kids kind of stays high, and we can keep that whole ecosystem working. But it's obviously a very important channel to us, and as we're just hopeful that it will all come back together in the fall.
Yeah, that'd be good. Here's Patty and John, you both mentioned a little about this early on. I wanted to ask maybe a little more detail. I'd say up until COVID, pretty much the trend had been for a number of years was just-in-time inventory, running, just short on for companies, end users, not having much inventory, and always relying on a supply chain that was very responsive and very quick to get product to them. Obviously, things have changed dramatically over the last 15 months or so, and we're still seeing those issues today, and probably will, I guess, for the rest of this year, or most of the rest of this year on that. Do you see, a question for both of you, do you see companies returning to a short inventory or just-in-time inventory strategy, or do you think this is the learnings over the last year or so are going to force companies to expand their supply base, maybe have additional suppliers, maybe shorten their supply lines, going from, instead of maybe a global supply, going to regional suppliers, and carrying more safety stock?
Well, I think they will naturally gravitate back towards just-in-time inventory management. It just financially makes more sense. But I think their eyes are open now to the potential risks of something like this. And again, they've got kind of a roadmap now. When this happens, they reduce the number of SKUs, they increase space for main staples, and they kind of flex with the needs as it evolves. And I think that's just a natural part of the business that will flex depending on the demand from consumers. And again, assuming we can move beyond the impacts of the recent pandemic, I think it will fall back into place in relatively short order.
Patty, do you see it any different on the export market?
I mean, I agree. I think midterm, obviously, financially, companies are going to drive back to getting more to just in time or as close as they can. But it's going to take a little while to get there. I think we're going to see a little bit of a settling out, particularly on the export side. I mean, we're all questioning today how much was bought ahead of time for Q4 demand, or even into Q1 from the standpoint of it. I use the analogy, it's at Christmas time. your son or daughter wants that little robot, right? So you go and order 5 of them, and the first one that comes, you take and you wrap it up for Christmas. The others you return. I mean, obviously in our business, we're not going to return products. So I think we have to look and see what that looks like. I do think you'll see more supply, from a diversity of supply. I think you'll see some big power players have more approved suppliers just to have some flexibility. I think we're going to see on the export side some warehousing in country or in market to help kind of bridge that gap is the way I look at it, right? So the product can get there. There's some on hand in country that can get moved for that just in time, which we kind of went to that model for a while. And then they kind of said, oh, let's just get it right to the factory and get it there. So I think we're going to find a happy medium on the export side. And some of that's probably a combination of increased suppliers as well as what I'll call a little bit of in-market holding of product.
Okay. Here's a question for both of you, and we haven't talked about this yet, but around sustainability. Obviously, that's becoming more and more important, not only for consumers and companies, but governments as well. How does dairy need to prepare for the expectations around sustainability of both customers and consumers going forward?
One of the things we talk about on the consumer side is that has come out of the pandemic is this merger between value and values. So as they have been very more kind of introspective about their lives, not just from a health standpoint, but from a social economic standpoint, sustainability has risen back again to the top of the pile in terms of concerns that consumers have around companies, around products, and they're doing more purpose-driven purchasing. They want to buy products from companies that are supporting some of the causes that they believe in. And sustainability is going to be more and more important. And, we have a great story. We have to continue to get it out there. Continue to talk to consumers about sustainability for dairy and what that means. And one of the key things, and I think this is one of our biggest challenges, is to help correct and attack some of the misinformation that's out there. It's overwhelming, and it just drives me up the wall when you hear things coming out of the press about dairy and its negative impact on the environment. And it's a tough thing to change, but we have to get after it, and we have to find ways to help correct the misinformation that's out there.
Yeah, no, I would agree wholeheartedly with that, and I think the things I would really lean on are to that of getting it out there, but is the communication around defining what our story really is, right? There's a lot of different definitions around sustainability. Is it carbon zero? Is it carbon neutral? But also, it's going back to not just telling our story on one piece of the dairy industry, but really doing the whole chain, right? So what we're doing with the animals, what we're doing on the farm, what we're doing in processing, what we're doing with packaging, but then also how we're exporting our business, right? When we look at the export business, we touch it a lot more with trucks, vessels, ocean freight. So, there's a lot more there, but it's really getting together as a common industry and telling our story. And really all living to that. And I think that's key to sustainability. I think in the past, it's been such a buzzword, and it's not anymore. It's real. Everybody is taking actions towards it. And I think it's time that we communicate what we're doing as an industry as a whole to show the importance of dairy. And it also elevates the fact of not only are we providing a nutritional product or ingredient, but that we're sustainable in how we're actually deriving it.
And I have one other thing, Mike. One of the areas when you ask consumers about sustainability, what does it mean to them? What do they think about it? What's important to them? The number one thing that comes back actually is packaging. And that's an area where we're just beginning to do a little work right now in terms of consumer research to try and find a better way to talk about the recyclability of dairy packaging, for instance, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to encourage consumers to recycle and to make sure they understand that milk jug is very recyclable, actually. And we need them to help, in terms of doing some of this kind of recycling activity. So packaging is a big one. And that's one that we have, a potential threat or risk in that the activists come down on us because of our packaging, and we need to avoid that.
Mm-hmm. Here's another question that came in around so one of the food trends here in recent years is non-GMO. Do you think consumers still have an interest in non-GMO food, or is that something that's maybe had a bit of a short-lived fad, and is it faded away? Is there still something that there's a future to?
Yeah.
Or do you think there's more interest in general sustainability practices now?
I would say it's moving more to general sustainability. The GMO thing, I laugh about it because it's a lot of those same people now that are eating synthesized meat, and what's the difference? It drives me crazy. But you don't certainly hear as much concern about that. I don't think it's gone away forever, but it has diminished at least somewhat.
Yeah, seems like it. Patty, any your perspective on the export front?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think on the export side, I mean, obviously, we're competing against Europe and other countries that have made declarations out there. But I would agree. I mean, I think, particularly on the dairy ingredient side, I think we're fine moving forward. I chuckle and it frustrates me as well, as a lot of those same groups are the ones that are eating the synthesized dairy products or meat products, right? So it just it's ironic to me that they'll eat something that's made in a laboratory, but they're worried about, other aspects of GMO. So I do think, I'm not going to say it's going to go away because there's always a point to it. But I think, the focus now is on environment, sustainability. And I think we'll take it one step further as there's more focus on nutrition and communicating that nutritive value and being able to demonstrate that versus maybe some of these ancillary concerns that have been kind of being a cloud over the industry. Okay,
great. I think we're about ready to run out of time. It'd be a good got one good last question that came in, and it is right from both your perspectives, and just leave on a very up note here, upbeat note. What future opportunities are you most excited about for California Dairy?
Well, I'll go first because I actually think that as we look at the entire dairy industry, we know the importance, and obviously it's a big part of my business, even though we do domestic as well, is finding that balance in the milk solids and export. I think this has opened up a lot of export channels for the United States, and we'll continue to expand that from a nutritive value. But I think it's because of some of the dynamics that countries and buyers will be looking at. I think it has put us back on the roadmap and on the map of being a quality supplier, a quality player in the industry. And, we've got some hurdles and some challenges, but we've done a great job as an industry as executing those through a pandemic. And what we call right now is at our beginning of our recovery mode. And I just look at the supply chain piece of it, of what we've been able to export or just move around domestically in a country during a major pandemic, and done it quite successfully. And I think that's something that's a huge opportunity for us. I also think it's going to make us think outside the box. We're not doing things the way we used to do it. We're finding new ways, more efficient ways, smarter ways of doing things, and it's going to drive our industry for the better. And those are huge opportunities for us.
Great.
So I'll have to say innovation is what really, really turns me on, and I get very excited about the opportunities ahead of us. I mentioned the Milk Accelerator program we've done. Also, we have recently been involved in the opening of the California Dairy Innovation Center, which is a collaboration of producers, processors, and universities to try and use science to help, processors develop new products. And I think there are just a whole host of opportunities out there, and we just have to get after them.
Okay, great. Well, thanks to both of you for, I think, a fantastic panel discussion. I hope for everybody that listened in feels good about the state of California dairy and the opportunities going forward. So again, thanks to both Patty and John for sharing their thoughts here today. And up next is the update on California trucking issues, and that will be coming up immediately as we wrap up here. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.
Thanks.